Mike Griffith here of SECcountry.com, where the SEC spring meetings have just wrapped up at the Hilton Destin Hotel. Greg Sankey meeting with the media, handing out the sheet with all the changes, and as expected, graduate transfers will be able to transfer in conference without sitting out a year. Now, the immediacy of this it's in question. The NCAA is scheduled to convene on June 11th in Indianapolis. I saw that Ralph Russo had a story on this, where the NC Transfer Working Group is going to meet, and they're going to vote on a policy that would stop schools from blocking kids who want to transfer. Now, this would be applicable to a lot of these in-conference transfers. We know most recently Nick Saban with Brandon Kennedy, the center who is interested in transferring to Auburn or Tennessee. Saban threw the block on him. That was a big item of contention earlier this week. What would happen? How would the coaches vote on it? How would the athletic directors vote on it? Greg Sankey saying that this provision has passed by a supermajority. Now, he wouldn't specify the number, but he said supermajorities more than a majority. So there you go. There you have it. That's one rule that has changed, is that now graduate transfers can transfer within the league without sitting out a year in residence, as they say. Now, again, we don't know how soon this is going to happen, but I would say probably June, after the NCAA committee meets on this, and they're probably going to get a provision passed that will stop coaches from being able to block specific schools in other transfer cases. That's probably the biggest rule change that came out of here. Another rule change that they were looking at was the serious misconduct rule, which prevents student athletes who have been found guilty of a felony crime or a serious misconduct offense at a member institution school from getting a scholarship. Now they're talking about extending that to prospects that are recruits. This rule would affect something like what happened at Michigan State, where there were a few athletes that were found guilty of a Title IX infraction. Later, their offense wasn't found to be as serious, but because that school had deemed that a serious misconduct violation, they would not be eligible for an SEC scholarship. This will be extended down to high school prospects that are interested in going to a school. So we kind of assumed that that was something that was going to happen, and that's what happened. Another transfer-related rule: if a student athlete is at a school that has a postseason ban, they will be allowed to transfer within the conference without penalty. And this is obviously amping up the compliance issue, making it very clear to member institutions, if you cheat, you could not only lose money and postseason exposure, but you could lose student athletes as well to other schools, and they wouldn't be privy, or the transfer rule would not be applicable should those things happen. So those three things are related to transfers then: the graduate transfers, transferring within conference without sitting out a year, and again, the NCAA committee meeting June 11th in Indianapolis. That's when I think this will take effect. If you're wondering how soon this can happen, I would say June is when this can happen. The other thing, the serious misconduct penalty now be extended to recruits in terms of whether or not they can get scholarships at SEC schools. No, they can if they've pled guilty to a serious misconduct felony, or if they have been found guilty of such by an academic institution. That's the second thing. And then the third thing, student athletes at a school that are on a postseason ban no longer will have to sit out a year. They will be able to transfer immediately. Those were a few of the items, those were a few of the items that were determined here in Destin, Florida, where the SEC commissioners have met. Another rule that's kind of related to football here: if a person on a football staff that has football duties, doesn't even have to be a coach, but they cannot be involved in a football club. And this is aimed specifically at 7-on-7 teams. So say you've got someone who works in the football athletic department and is related to the football team. He or she can no longer be a part of these 7-on-7 clubs. Obviously, this is to diminish an opportunity to have some illegal exposure, recruiting, things that would give the institution a built-in advantage in terms of the exposure they would get to the student athlete. The SEC also peeled back a bylaw that they had passed in 2012 that prohibited basketball workouts on campus during recruiting trips. Now this rule will be in line with NCAA rules, and the SEC won't be at such a disadvantage because other conferences don't necessarily have this stipulation. So now the basketball players that are on campus can get a workout, essentially, tryouts, I guess. SEC baseball, SEC softball, they can add another staff member that can go out and recruit. They go from 3 to 4. Obviously, this is an advantage for baseball and softball as they compete with other conferences around the country, but no more volunteer coaches involved in baseball and softball. That's the give and take of that. Prospects used to get 6 tickets to games, now down to 5. This will make it uniform with how many people that they can go out to the dinners with when they're on campus and the institution can pay for unofficial visits. So some uniformity there. Greg Sankey also said they didn't take a vote on it, but the SEC is fine with 68 teams in the NCAA tournament, not 72. Again, no vote on that, but Sankey just kind of gave us that that's the drift from the from the SEC, and he also said that by 2020 the SEC will have metal detectors at all of the different events, as reported by Brett McMurphy. So that's kind of how it shakes out here. Kind of things went down like we thought they would go down. Pretty interesting spring meetings. Obviously, it was a first for Philip Fulmer as an athletic director, Jeremy Pruitt also for Tennessee earlier in the week. Some colorful comments from Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart. Wrote a lot about that on seccountry.com. So I'll take your questions and answer them to the best of my ability. If you've got questions, this is a Facebook Live broadcast, so I can see your comments on my screen. Let's see here. Roll Tide until Georgia puts a stop to that, Pete Williams said. And, you know, that was really kind of the sentiment. I went on a show, the Dog Nation show, on dognation.com with Brandon Adams, and he asked me, you know, was there an underlying tone? What's kind of the scuttlebutt? And, you know, it doesn't feel like this is just the Alabama football conference anymore. I think Georgia made a statement, and I think a lot of people don't think Georgia's going anywhere. And meanwhile, Alabama had a lot of staff turnover. We know Nick Saban's had staff turnover before, and it hasn't stopped him. They made rule changes before, and it hasn't stopped them. And I would still say that Alabama is still the prohibitive favorite to win the SEC in football, and yet still, I think a lot of people feel like Georgia's not going anywhere. And that was kind of the drift that I picked up on. Obviously, SEC basketball is as healthy as ever. Georgia coach Tom Crean here, he's going to be a great addition to the league. He's a high-energy guy. He was here doing all the interviews he could, really selling himself and selling his program. Reminded me a lot of Bruce Pearl. When I was covering Tennessee basketball, Bruce Pearl came in with that same enthusiasm. I see a lot of Bruce Pearl and Tom Crean in that sense of the marketing and taking it upon himself to go out there and market the program. And I also covered Michigan State's Tom Izzo, and Crean, obviously a former Izzo assistant, recently wrote a story today, in fact, for dognation.com about how Crean says come Monday, he's going to create some adversity for these guys. This offseason is going to be really hard for Georgia basketball. He's going to try and toughen them up. He says it doesn't matter how much talent you have. If your guys can't handle adversity, it doesn't matter. And, you know, there's plenty of schools we could apply that to. Rick Barnes was here, walking a little taller, as he should. Tennessee, a preseason top 5 team. After being picked 13th in the SEC, the Vols won 26 games and finished as SEC co-champions with Auburn and Bruce Pearl. Another huge success story for Auburn. Despite all the off-the-court distractions, Auburn basketball was able to win a share of the SEC Conference Championship, reach the top 10. So 2 big success stories, Tennessee basketball, Auburn basketball. I don't think any of us expected that. Meanwhile, Kentucky maybe not going as far as we thought. Calipari showed up here, you know, kind of played his game. I mean, he's always one of the more interesting interviews out there, talking about Georgia being a top 3 coaching job and Tennessee's a top 3 coaching job. And, you know, he had all sorts of compliments to pass out to the other schools, as Cal usually does. A little gamesmanship there, perhaps, as he fully aware that Kentucky clearly a much, much, much better situation than either Georgia or Tennessee when it comes to basketball in terms of the support and things like that. I'm going to go back here, scroll through here, and look for some of your questions now. We've got some fans here that a Roll Tide here, not a surprise. Seems like the rules are directed at Bama and Ole Miss for different reasons. Tom Murphy. Well, let me explain, and I said this in one of my earlier podcasts about Alabama and Nick Saban. I kind of compare Saban to a really good NASCAR crew chief. And it's kind of his job to innovate, look for ways to give his school an advantage. You can have all the money and resources in the world, but if you don't know how to use them, it doesn't do you much good. Michigan, Jim Harbaugh. Although I'm sure those trips overseas are very attractive to prospects. I'm not sure how many more games that will actually help Michigan win. Saban, however, has really made the best use of his resources, and the NCAA has to kind of sit back and look at this and say, you know, there may not be a rule against this, but should there be? And that was something that kind of happened in NASCAR all the time. I always use the Jeff Gordon, with the aluminum rims that his car had, or the titanium rims that his car had in the 1990s for an all-star race, and he about lapped the field. And NASCAR came back and said, yeah, well, we don't have a rule against that, but now we will. And it's kind of like that with Saban, with some of the things he's done with the recruiting assistants, the interns now, the specialist coaches, whether it was Steve Sarkisian or now Butch Jones, whomever, bringing these experts in. And while they can't have on-field coaching contact, their expertise can still be used in the room. They can still review film. They can still talk with other coaches about what they see. And clearly the 20 headset rule is kind of aimed at narrowing this down, saying, okay, on game day, we're going to level the playing field. And that's pretty much what happened. It was also revealed this week that there are only so many of the coaches that can be in the skybox during the game. So another rule kind of aimed at the schools with the greater resources. And it's not like we don't want Nick Saban to win. It's not like the NCAA is saying that. It's more of we need to level the playing field so that all the FBS institutions can have the same opportunities and maybe not have a built-in advantage for these schools that have so many more financial resources, because they already have advantages, whether it's better dorms, whether it's better stadiums, better facilities, bigger recruiting budget, higher budget to hire better coaches and expertise. So maybe you want to try and level the playing field a little bit when it comes to things like headsets, number of coaches that can be in the skybox. I get it, but I also understand why Alabama fans and Nick Saban might feel like the rule was aimed at them. As for the Ole Miss reference, I just think Ole Miss is the school right now on the hot seat. I mean, we've seen a lot of schools, and certainly in my time since covering the SEC since 1993, we've seen a lot of schools go through this postseason ban and penalties and things like that. And at each turn, you do want to put some penalties forth that's going to try and discourage these teams from cheating, because we've all asked the question, is it worth it to cheat? Quite frankly, I mean, you get to go to the big bowl game, you get great exposure, you recruit a lot of players, and okay, so you don't play in the postseason for a couple of years. It doesn't take away the exposure you got and the platform that you reached. In Ole Miss's case, obviously, there was more collateral damage than in other cases, but, I just shot something with ESPN Films yesterday. They've got a series coming up this fall, kind of a memory series, and I talked about 1993 Auburn, a team that wasn't allowed on television. Can you imagine if you weren't allowed on television? In this day and age, it just wouldn't happen. But back in 1993, that's exactly what happened. 1993 was not. So the penalties seem awful stiff, awful firm, but relative to what they once were, I still don't think they're quite as strong. So I'm going to look for some more comments here. Kenny Hawthorne, Vance Jefferson eligible now. I just talked with Edgar Thompson, fantastic Florida Gators beat writer in Orlando. Really, Florida, you have a lot of great writers. Kevin Brockway, another really talented guy, and Ryan Young, certainly one of my colleagues that works 24/7. He's not eligible right now, almost on a technicality. You might have missed the beginning of the broadcast. The NCAA is convening on June 11th. Ralph Russo, the Associated Press, had a story about this yesterday. The NCAA is convening on June 11th in Indianapolis, and they're going to have a vote, and we think it'll pass, that will stop schools from being able to block the transfers from going to certain schools. That's going to be abolished, we believe. And that should be the final step in the clearance for these student athletes, whether it's Brandon Kennedy or Vance Jefferson. So technically no, but down the line it's just a matter of time. I don't know, Kenny, if that answers your question. That's the best that I could assimilate from today's meeting with Commissioner Sankey and my talk with him after the meeting. Who do I think will be Bama's starting quarterback? I think you better roll with the guy that won the national championship for you in the second half. That's my opinion on that. Excuse me, again, I know this looks awkward. I'm reaching out and scrolling through my screen. This is a Facebook Live broadcast, a little bit different than maybe most that you're used to. Just glad to see the SEC is getting better in all the sports. Certainly basketball, yes. John Wilson warning Nick Saban that Kirby's coming. Let's see if we have any more questions here. Do I think coaches will still try to block transfers? Hannah, Michelle, I hope that answered your question, that the NCAA is meeting on June 11th in Indianapolis, and there's going to be some legislation proposed that would that would not allow coaches to block transfers from certain schools. Let's see here. Kirby can come after. It looks like a lot of trash talking between Georgia and Alabama here, as there should be. You know, two SEC teams playing for a national championship. That was kind of a big deal. Outstanding game. I still can't believe that Alabama was able to come back like that. I really didn't expect that. I thought Georgia had that one in the bag. You know, Nick Saban has never lost to one of his assistant coaches. It's an unbelievable stat. I don't know the number now. I want to say 11-0 or 12-0. I covered Michigan State when Michigan State played Alabama and got hammered largely because their quarterback had a bad shoulder and Alabama knew it. They were able to really press up and stuff the run here. If you have any more questions, again, rolling through the comments here. Any word on the SEC expanding to 16? I didn't hear any kind of thoughts on that. Don't expect that to happen. Another roll tide from Alabama fans. Alabama fans are everywhere, as they should be. But you know what? I saw Tennessee fans here. I saw Arkansas fans here. People that were just on vacation wearing their colors. And, you know, that's what's really cool to me about the SEC is you can be traveling anywhere in the country and see those SEC logos, the passion for this league. And don't get me wrong, in the Big Ten, there was a lot of passion as well. But the SEC, I feel like it's more year-round. And it has a lot to do with the geography of it. You know, in the Big Ten, you have a lot of professional sports teams in those large cities, where in the SEC, that's more of a new occurrence. You know, for example, with the Tennessee Titans in Nashville and Carolina Panthers. Falcons have been there a long time, but for a long time nobody cared. They've obviously risen a little bit more to prominence, like the Saints. But for early on, you know, those Midwestern cities with all their professional sports teams has kind of a stratification effect on the fan bases. So, for example, you could be a Michigan State fan, but if Michigan State's not faring well, you just turn on the Detroit Lions. Or maybe you're ready for the Detroit Red Wings or the Detroit Pistons, where I feel like in terms of Southern geography, you're more bound to your school year-round because there's less choices of other schools. And also because of the tradition with the SEC that goes back all the way to the 1960s. You know, a pretty tough time for our country with civil rights, particularly south of the Mason-Dixon line, and yet people had their schools and their success on the gridiron to hold on to, and we're very proud of that. There's been a lot of studies on this done. I'm no professor of history, but certainly having covered Alabama and Auburn and Tennessee over a period of about 21 years, you'll learn a lot about the SEC and why things are the way they are. You certainly recognize they're still that way, how much everyone cares about their schools. Is Tennessee's transfer on campus yet? Reggie Daniels wants to know. It's June 1st. I'd say any day now. I know J.T. Shroud is there. He's the incoming freshman from California. I think Keller Chris' situation, he's the graduate transfer from Stanford. I believe his situation is he'll come to Tennessee and then he'll go back to Stanford for the graduate ceremonies, if I'm not mistaken. So I think Chris will kind of be in and out. I think that might be the case with Shroud as well. Hannah Michelle says he's not there yet. Like I said, I have not talked with Jeremy Pruitt today about that, but I would expect Keller Chris to be on campus anytime now. It is June 1st. If you've got any more questions on this Facebook Live broadcast, feel free to ask. Again, I'll review those transfer rules one more time here. Graduate transfers will be able to transfer in conference without a year in residence, without sitting out for a year. That's going to happen moving forward, pending this June 11th meeting in Indianapolis with the NCAA where there's some legislation to stop schools from blocking kids for individual transfers within the conference. The second one being the serious misconduct penalty now being extended, or the serious misconduct provision now being extended to high school prospects. Basically says if someone is found guilty or pleads to a felony or is found guilty of a serious misconduct violation by an academic institution, they will not be eligible for an SEC scholarship. That's the second one. And then the third transfer provision is if a school has a postseason band, the student athletes will be eligible for transfer within the conference immediately. So that pretty much wraps it up. Those are the major things that were passed here today in Destin, Florida. That concludes from the SEC spring meetings here at the Hilton Sandestin. It's been an eventful week. I've had some other podcasts early on, and I appreciate everyone watching and asking the questions. It should be an interesting year across the SEC. Megan Bandy wants to know, who do I think will be the Vols quarterback? I think you'll see two quarterbacks play, at least two quarterbacks play. Ultimately, I would say Keller Christ, with his 4 years of experience in a pro-style offense, as Jared Garantano, the returning sophomore scholarship quarterbacks, have had about 4 months of that offense. Both certainly capable, but I would think it would go to the graduate transfer and his experience playing in this pro-style system. So everyone, have a great, happy, safe weekend. Thank you again for joining us. Mike Griffith for SEC Country signing off from Destin, Florida.